Hello, welcome to Internet TCI, our monthly program where we explore the global internet. As always, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime, Dr. Charles Severance.
Thank you, Rich. Well, I've had an interesting month, but let's start by you telling us a little bit about what you've been doing last month or so.
You've been doing all kinds of net stuff, huh?
Oh yeah, go ahead though, you start.
Well, boy, I got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Okay.
First off, I was foolish enough to go off to New York City last week. Foolish not because of any problem in New York City. It's a wonderful town.
I sent you email you while you were there.
Yeah, and you were singing New York, New York whenever.
That's right.
You know, I'm told you do that at karaoke places.
I do that all the time.
Glad I've missed that. The foolish part about going to New York City, though, was it's December. The Internet World Conference had 50,000 people attending, and everybody else is in New York shopping and
Right.
seeing New York in the holidays, you know, the Radio City Music Hall and everything. So I, foolishly enough, had to rent a car and drive from way the heck out on Long Island every day, in and out of New York City, and you learn a little bit about traffic problems when you do that. Well, you and I are both real fond of using our cell phones, right. And so I thought, well, at least I can, you know, call Chuck up and plan the next show we're going to do or whatever. And I couldn't get the cell phone to work. And
we never plan the next show. I don't understand. Go ahead.
Well, maybe that was a problem.
Yeah.
We never have planned the next show. So I first spoke with a number of incompetent customer service reps at Bell Atlantic 9X, who then forwarded me to a number of incompetent customer service reps at Century Cellunet. And I never did find out what the problem was until, you know, like I get home. And they explain what's going on. They tell me, oh, we voided our agreement. You can't roam into New York City because there's so much fraud going on. And now you may say, well, what the heck does this have to do with the internet other than you just grousing, Rich? The connection is, if you know, we tend to talk about problems in authentication and authorization
right.
in a computer and network context. And it occurred to me, this is the exact same problem that we face when we wander around the country and plug in a public network computer or whatever, identifying who I am to a trusted third party, uniquely identifying and not letting anyone else steal my identity.
Well, it's a little different though. I think part of the problem with that is that in the internet we assume that there's bad guys everywhere and try to cope with that up front. I think what the problem with cell phones is they're assuming that no one's going to figure out how to cheat on cell phones. They sort of don't assume they're bad guys, so the bad guys are much more effective on cell phones.
True. Well, the analogy is that each phone has been programmed with its own unique number worldwide.
But then the bad guys can change that.
Analogous to an Ethernet card, which every Ethernet card has its own unique number
and
worldwide.
Bad guys can change that too.
Bad guys could screw around with that, but the way we deal with that is you administer those Ethernet cards within networks,
right.
And the ISP takes the responsibility,
exactly.
And the Ethernet card doesn't move around.
I'm just saying that in the internet we assume bad guys from the very beginning. So we deal with the problem. Not that everyone's bad.
Not that we've solved the problem.
No, but I think the internet has a little advantage in that it's not just a security by obscurity, but the thought that
True.
There are these Dutch hackers that you sort of assume they're always coming after your computers.
Dutch hackers.
Well,
we've just lost a percentage of our audience, Chuck.
A small one, I hope. Of course,
well,
this is all about Europe today, so.
That's right. That's right. Well, moving right along here. So, as you know, I've recently been doing a forum on America Online, and that forum ended in October. And I've been doing a fair amount of flying around lately. And we all know that America Online carpet bombs the country with these little starter
Free
disks.
diskettes.
And so it's kind of hard to put one's mind, you know, you can't avoid AOL, they're in the
right.
news a lot. So I'm flying around on Northwest Airlines, and the flight attendant comes around and hands around this packet. I want you to open this packet and tell me what's inside it.
Is this?
You would think it would be food, perhaps.
America Online Inside. Try the nation's leading online service for free.
Well, while you're breaking into that, let me show you the other thing that I got at Internet World, and this is for you or one of your kids. If we can zoom in on this a little bit, you can see this is a way cool button that people were wearing. It was flashing at Internet World. Although when they saw that it said America Online, the cool internet people kind of went, I don't know if I want to wear that. But
well, thanks. Okay, so I finally got this one apart. Boy, you're so nice to me, Rich. I got this one apart, and it's a bag of pretzels and an America Online diskette.
You can't get away from these people.
No,
you're
you
flying, you're at 8 miles high, and they're handing you starter disks. It's just amazing.
I think they're 8 miles high.
And then the flight attendant comes on at the same time and says, we've now reached a height at which you're allowed to
turn on your computer and connect to America Online.
Okay, a couple of other things from Internet World. I'm wandering around this trade floor, and there are hundreds of exhibitors. This conference is only just a few years old. They now have hundreds of exhibitors come to this thing. I walk by one booth, and this one fellow says, let me tell you about our software. This is software to help a small business establish a site on the internet. And then he gets distracted. And so do I. I walk away to another booth. I'm several booths away from this guy, and the CEO of this company, which had a rather large booth at Internet World, comes back and tackles me. He tackles me because I have a press badge on, since I write for Internet World, and it was the Internet World Conference. Drags me back to his booth, tells me all about this software, insists that I take a free copy of it. Now let me tell you what it is, and I want you to guess what the price of it might be. This is software that basically is a light version of what you would get if you went and got Netscape Commerce Server or the Microsoft's Enterprise Server or any of these professional quality web server packages that includes encryption. So if you're a very small business but you have direct net access and your customers want to be able to come in and enter credit card numbers in a secure way, this has SSL in it. It also has database features in it. We talked in last month's episode about this article I wrote about web-to-database middleware, where you've got an SQL server, and then you have a little bit of middleware software, and then you have your web server, and you do a little bit of programming in all these environments, and when you're done, you can store data. This has a baby database, so you could set up a web catalog, you know, if you want to have a storefront and so forth. How much do you think this software costs?
Well, as you keep going back and forth, the price kind of jumps up and down. I think $49.95. I think $250. I think $950.
The show price.
I'm going to guess. I'm just going to come $350 is going to be my guess.
That's probably the list price. The show price was $179. And
That's
so the
pretty
theory
impressive.
is, if you added all that other stuff up that you would otherwise buy, it would be a few $1,000s. And
well, I think a lot of folks need a product like that can do a little bit of database, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of security, not necessarily the highest end possible thing, but just kind of your basic interactive two-way website. So I think that's a pretty neat little product.
well, we'll have to plug it into a computer sometime and see how well it works. Okay, continuing in this theme, you remember on last month's episode we both gushed about the Northwest Airlines site and how much we liked it. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of a challenge for you here, Chuck. I'm going to hold up, this is the current World Traveler magazine.
Yep.
I'm going to hold up this magazine so folks can see, here's the route system for Northwest. And there's a little island in the Caribbean called Antigua.
Okay.
And Chuck, I'll show you this. If you look, there's a red line going there. Okay. Here this is. You take this keyboard, sir.
Uh-oh.
I want you to go to the Northwest site. I got it bookmarked. And I want you to find Antigua.
Okay.
Now,
You better do something while I'm doing this, because this could take a while.
Well, we'll make something up to do here. The reason why we're doing this to you, Chuck, is because having bragged about this site, I've discovered there are certain limitations to this site. One of them is I recently discovered they use the infernal blink tag. This upsets me terribly to learn that this site that I thought was so wonderful uses the blink tag. But besides bragging about the Northwest site here on Internet TCI, I write for Internet World magazine, and they asked me to list the best and worst of 1996.
Uh-oh.
And I listed the best airline site on the Internet, and I picked Northwest Airlines. Had a lot of experience with it, thought it was a great user interface. Well, you'll recall that last month we couldn't find how do you actually buy a ticket on this site.
And I complained about that.
And we looked and looked, and it turned out I read an article where they actually admitted we haven't figured out how to do tickets over the Internet yet, but we're working on it and we'll have it real soon. So I figured, well, my little article in Internet World, it won't be that big a deal. We won't worry about this too much. It'll just be one little line in the article. What do they do as the artwork on that page? They have a giant Northwest Airlines jet taking off as the featured part of that page in my article, and it's like, great.
Now boarding rows 1 through 29, and when those are complete, Mr. Wiggins can board.
Well, and I haven't gotten any frequent flyer miles out of it, but please, Northwest, please, get electronic ticketing on here. You're selling e-tickets, but I can't actually buy the e-ticket on the Internet. There's something wrong here. Please
There's
don't.
no Antigua.
There is, I'm sorry. We have a result here from the doctor. What do you mean?
I think there's no Antigua. Antwerp?
You've done
Pontiac,
it. ANU is the airport code. There is no Antigua. It's actually pronounced Antigua. The British mispronounced it when Columbus discovered the island.
We're stuck with it forever.
And we're stuck with it forever.
Go ahead.
But the problem that we have here is that there are a bunch of these seasonal places that Northwest flies off to.
Well, are they smart enough to take them out?
Well, think about this for a second. You can reserve a ticket a year in advance.
Oh, okay. So they take them out.
They ought to leave it in, and it ought to say seasonal. Right?
You are one news hound kind of guy. I wonder if you're going to get the Pulitzer Prize for Internet investigative reporting.
We've picked on Northwest enough. Now, a couple more items here. You'll probably wonder why I'm holding this bottle of Zima. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
A couple more items from Internet World. First off, we've talked about the power of the URL, the Uniform Resource Locator, as kind of a macro.
Right.
You can put it on the side of a bus and people will know what to do with it. More and more folks at this trade show were not handing out hefty chunks of literature. They were handing out tiny little chunks of URLs.
Absolutely.
Go home with the URL.
Right.
And if you've ever hauled back a lot of literature from a trade show, this is a lot more fun, right?
Right. Oh,
So
absolutely.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Final thing from Internet World. The coolest party in New York last week was put on by a company called Oz.
Undoubtedly you were there.
OZ.
Otherwise you couldn't call it.
anticipate-
Otherwise you wouldn't call it the coolest party.
You
I'm sure.
anticipate the story. Oz is a company that's out of Iceland, and they've developed an avatar-based chat system. Now, on Internet
World-
TCI, we
yep.
talked about World's Chat. We're very fond of that. This is a competitive system to
Right.
that. And what they did is they brought bands in, including one band from Iceland and another band from LA and one from somewhere else. And they have a virtual reality suit that they put the lead singer in. And so the movements of the lead singer on stage were sent worldwide to the Oz virtual party, and they claim it's the first virtual rock concert with movements in an avatar-based system transmitted worldwide. And I was there, and in a future episode of Internet TCI, we'll see some footage on an On the Road segment. The other thing they did, which I didn't know was possible, and I want you to react to this, this is a CD of software that demonstrates their VRML browser, and also it's audio from the band that they brought over from Iceland. I did not know that you could have a disc that was both a CD-ROM and an audio CD, and it would work natively in both environments without any extra added effort.
I don't know the details, but I've seen it happen before. Some kids' games. If you put like a kid game CD-ROM, like a living book, and you stick it in an audio player, it'll play the soundtracks. And so there must be something at the very beginning that says, here's the start of audio and here's the start of data.
So the
And they're
boot
smart.
record for
Something.
doesn't get in the way of
ISO
the...
9960 something or other's got it all figured out. So yeah,
Okay.
you can do it.
Good enough. One final item. Here I am sitting here with a bottle of Zima, and you're wondering what the heck's going on.
I know what you're going to do.
We're always looking for an odd place with a
Exactly.
URL. They don't have a URL. They have an email address. They have youcan@zima.com. Well, we got to guess if they got zima.com registered. So what
gotta-
happens if we go to zima.com?
www.zima.com. Well, how come they don't put it?
Wow.
They got it right there. How come they don't put it on?
I don't know. They don't have... they
So
don't
that's the
have-
first place where there should be a URL, but it's
Exactly.
not. Oh, that's
Exactly.
something unique. So
We expose everything vital about URLs and where they
you're
are.
taking this journalistic thing a
Here
little
on
too
Internet
serious.
TCI.
Yeah.
We're on top of it.
Okay, well, before we finish this open segment, I want to talk a little bit about my last month. A while back, I went to Europe. I
Yes.
visited two places. I visited Brussels and I visited Switzerland. And the two segments in the show are going to be ones from
Now, Brussels would be a city, and Switzerland would be a country.
That's correct.
Okay,
But I
let's
did
check.
visit them both.
Okay.
I bought this jacket. This jacket is something I brought back. Normally, you bring something back. I bought this in Brussels, and you'll actually see the street on which I bought it. Well, we'll see the style of these is in the form of Internet on the Road and travelogue, kind of all blended together.
Home movies, in other words.
Home movies, exactly. So, and I'm just, Rich and I carry these cameras. We talk about these cameras all the time. This is camera number 2. Camera number 1 went around the world and it's been retired. It's going to take home videos forever. This is my camera number 2, and this is the one that actually went to Brussels and to
and
Switzerland.
that's my camera number
and
one back.
that used to be your camera number 1. So it's sort of like a roving family. So this is my baby that goes with me everywhere from now on. So
Cool.
But I'm looking forward to those segments and seeing what you have to react to those segments.
Okay. In today's Internet for Everyone segment, we're going to talk about real-time communications on the Internet. And in overview, I'd like to talk about all the ways I've wasted a lot of hours of my life communicating over the Internet. Let's look at some examples. I'd really challenge anyone to prove that they've spent more time in these sorts of communications. This sort of goes by decade. Back in the 70s, we had an old system on our control data mainframe called Message, and you could do very simple text mode communication at 110 baud and communicate with the person in the next room. Chuck would often be the person in the next room where we'd waste time when we could just walk back and forth and talk to each other. Now comes the 80s, and I got involved with a conferencing system called Confer at the University of Michigan. In fact, I met my significant other over that medium. Then we got into the 90s, and I got to using things like Usenet and a number of mailing lists. I began hosting some real-time chats on America Online. And then finally, earlier this year, I had a housewarming that included random guests from Australia coming to visit us over CUC-Me and the TCI Met service that we use for high-speed internet access. Let's talk about what the demands are that real-time communication will place on the infrastructure of the internet. Let's, for instance, talk about a service like AudioNet. AudioNet is a place down in Texas, and they license the Real Audio software that allows streaming of real-time audio data, whether it's a radio station or a concert or whatever, in real time over the internet. Well, the internet wasn't really designed for the kind of purposes we're putting it to when we use something like Real Audio. With the internet, we call it a network of networks, and we have many, many thousands of routers that have been installed on the network. All the information that's sent across the network is sent in the form of digital packets that have to be routed a bunch across of hops all the way down to their destination. And it's very common between the user sitting at their desktop and the server that's serving the data for there to be a dozen or more links and therefore routers in between. So these routers have had the most challenge placed on them by real-time communication. You want to get these packets through as fast as possible, and they all have to get there within a certain sort of boundary of real time, and if they don't, the listener on the other end is going to experience dropouts. They're not going to get the full benefit of what they're listening to. Now, one way we can cope with this is the software such as Real Audio has a process of buffering. So when you first connect to a real-time site on the internet, you'll notice it's saying buffering, and it'll count down to fill up a buffer within your own workstation. Now, if there's a blockage of some sort, some congestion or some sort of an outage that causes data to not get through, then you can have a little bit of real time for things to catch up with each other so you can actually get the message you need to listen to in real time. A lot of the real-time communication schemes on the internet follow a concept of a reflector. And what this is a piece of hardware running some software that knows how to send out audio and perhaps text and perhaps video to all the people that are part of the conversation. So rather than having every workstation that wants to communicate with a whole bunch of other people back and forth send n-squared amounts of data, we have each individual who's broadcasting send data once to the reflector site, and the reflector site in turn sends the data back out to all the listeners. And that's a fairly efficient way to carry out this sort of real-time communication. Let's run through some examples of the real-time communication schemes that are out there. One of the most basic and popular is something called Internet Relay Chat. At any given minute, there are 10,000 people around the planet talking over IRC. In the Windows environment, the most popular client for IRC is something called MIRC. And when you fire that up, you'll have a whole bunch of servers to choose among. And a lot of these servers have been sort of stitched together into a global network. Pick a server and start chatting. IRC has a concept of channels. And these channels are very analogous to what we had back in the 70s when we had Citizen Bands Radio. You had sort of little conventions that said, pound IRC newbies is going to be for new folks coming onto IRC. So just like Channel 9 on CB was a way to find new people to talk to. When you go into IRC, it's sort of anyone can talk whenever they want to. It all comes out in text mode, and everybody has a handle. The handle is how you keep up with who it is that had something to say, a nickname of sorts. And over here we have a scrollable list of all the nicknames participating in the current room, and then whenever you say something, your text is automatically identified. Let's talk about another different scheme for real-time communication, something out of Cornell University called CUC-Me. With CUC-Me, you go and you pick an institution that is running a reflector, like you might go to the biker bar at the University of Michigan, double-click on that, and you can join a conversation. Now you'll get a bunch of different windows on your screen. One will show a list of the other participants. Some of the participants will be visible. They'll be folks that you can actually see in a window that is active on your screen. Other folks may be hidden users, and that may be because you just don't have enough screen space to hold all these different windows, and you can choose among the hidden and the visible. Now these little icons here of eyes show you whether they can see you or not. So if the eye is open, they can see you, and that means your camera is functioning and your window is on their screen. When you're running CUC-Me, these are what the windows might look like. And you'll see the handle of the person that you're talking to, and you'll see the name for each of these windows. I'm Rich, here's Vanity, and here's Cool Runnings. We can also get a little bit of information about that person and what speed they're transmitting and so forth. See You See Me also comes with a whiteboard. And with this, we can do sort of real-time collaboration on the internet. So besides seeing pictures of each other, we can both draw on a whiteboard and carry on let's say, a design of a new swing, perhaps, or maybe a dynamic polymer reconfigurator. Now, one of the challenges with See You See Me is finding reflectors in other users. We don't really have a global directory structure that's hierarchical. So if I want to have a conversation with Chuck in real time over See You See Me, we're going to have to agree on a reflector site, and we're going to have to agree on how to get there. And often that means exchanging IP addresses. In fact, I'm cynical enough to say that See You See Me is sort of the last place on the internet where we still deal in IP addresses. We would rather deal in friendly domain-style host names. And if you go to this URL, you'll find a nice list of reflectors, and you can use that as your set of starting points on See You See Me. Finally, I want to talk about Microsoft Net Meeting. Real-time communication and collaboration on the internet is a hot topic, and Microsoft is not sitting idly by while other companies put out tools and software. Now, Net Meeting is going to have some advantages over other real-time communications tools because it's going to have hooks into the operating system. And this means we can not only do text mode chat or perhaps audio chat, but potentially with Microsoft Net Meeting, we can actually execute an application on somebody else's desktop. So let's say I've got some data and I need to share it with Chuck. I've got it in an Excel spreadsheet. Chuck needs to actually go and pull that data out of that spreadsheet. Well, the easiest way for him to do that might be to actually open up the spreadsheet and cut and paste. Now, in the old style way of doing things, I might mail him a floppy, or I might use FTP to transfer the file. In the new Microsoft Net Meeting way, he and I might carry on an audio conversation across the internet, and I say, well, here's permission, Chuck. Go ahead and open up this spreadsheet, execute it, and he literally will use graphic commands to drag, cut, and paste, and move things on to his desktop and into his application. So real-time communications has come a long way from sort of simple text mode chat, and is going to go a long way further still.
Rich, that was a great report. My sort of reaction is that to me, the biggest limitation of any of these real-time communication mechanisms is security. If you look at IRC or See You See Me, their security is sort of brain damaged at best, in a sense. I mean, they're based on IP addresses, and some administrator has to say, oh, you're a bad guy, so I'm going to make it so your IP address can't talk anymore. You know, they don't even have things like passwords that they challenge to say, who are you? Are you part of Michigan State University? Are you part of my authorized list of folks? So that, to me, is one of the most frustrating things about putting up these reflectors. You know, they talked about Biker Bar at U of M. It's just wide open. You open one up and the world shows up on your doorstep. It's hard to create sort of a personalized little environment where you can have tight control unless you've got to do IP address by IP address by IP address. This guy can do it, this guy can't. And I think that's actually one of Net Meeting's other advantages, in that you can create your own meeting and call everybody or send them email, you know, at 2 o'clock, here's their meeting and here's where it's going to be, and hope to put a little bit of security on so people can't just sort of crash your net meeting, in a sense, to say you got to have a password.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Chuck. I think a lot of what goes on in real-time communication on the internet today is really quite primitive.
Right.
And I'm a little bit cynical about trying to use real-time communication for serious stuff. I tried doing it on America Online for a number of months, and I believe there are fundamental limitations, at least when we're stuck in text mode, to the very format that impede any serious communication. It's really great if you want to flirt with somebody. It's really great if you want to talk to a celebrity and pose a question for Colin Powell and then let him answer for hundreds or thousands of people. Wonderful for that kind of stuff. I have never met a situation where a group of more than about 2 in internet-based communications has a serious, productive conversation that's sustained for any length of time. Now, I'm about to issue my challenge. Should I do that?
You go ahead and issue your challenge.
I will buy a lunch at Pistachios here in East Lansing, a nice restaurant. Airfare's on your own, but I will buy lunch for anyone who can tell me a place on the internet where there is sustained, serious, or scholarly discussion in chat mode. Now, this is not to say I don't believe this stuff isn't going to go anywhere, because as bandwidth gets better and as we move out of typing and into more human-like, face-to-face-like media, as it gets more like being in a room together, then it's going to go places.
But I also think the fundamental problem is you create an IRC server and the world shows up on your doorstep, and then they're talking bar talk from that moment on.
There are lots of fundamental problems.
If I could say this is only for physicists and I can verify that it's a physicist, people would use that a lot more effectively.
I disagree. If the bandwidth didn't get better and we're still stuck in text mode, physicists will go to mailing lists, they will go to Usenet news groups.
That's true.
They will not all sit in real time. Chuck mentioned in our opening segment that he's been off to Europe and he's done some wonderful things, and in today's On the Road we're going to find out about those things. But before we go off and see that segment, one of our little traditions is that when we go on the road we bring something back for the other guy. And when I was off at Internet World, I found something that perhaps one of your children might like to play with.
Oh, well, thank you. HTML script. We'll visit this site later in the show.
Now the question is, will your children visit the site?
Oh, I don't know. Probably in a few years.
Okay. Tell us about your On the Road segment.
Okay, when I go on the road, especially when I go to Europe, one of the things I do is I find people to interview for the On the Road segment. And the other thing that I do is I take pictures of scenery, because I sort of have this burning desire to make a travelogue film. So in the On the Road segment, in this and later in the show, you'll see these sort of travelogue-like pictures. So don't be surprised when you see panoramic vistas of Switzerland in the middle of my report interviewing Dave LeBeau. Dave is a little bit unsure of how wonderful the internet is. So here's my report from Switzerland. Hi Rich, this is Chuck. I'm talking to you right now from Interlaken, Switzerland. Our good friend Dave LeBeau is running the camera. We've been looking at some very beautiful scenery, and we decided to stop and film the opening of the segment. And of course the whole topic of this segment is about my obsession with the internet in Europe. And I've talked with Nick Stoughton, a consultant, an internet consultant in the United Kingdom, and probably talk with Dave LeBeau a little bit about his views on the internet before the trip is all over. So,
hi Rich, this is David. We're here in Mühleberg, Switzerland. We've been collared by Chuck for the segment, the interview on the road, so I have to stand like this.
Exactly.
Exactly like this.
Okay. So, in what ways do you currently use the internet, Dave?
For us right now, it's partly experimental and partly me too, I suppose. The internet for us is not really yet a production tool on the one hand, and as a software engineering firm for us right now, it's a case of we have to go and see what the bigger players are doing, what the Microsofts are doing finally, and just to make sure that we're not left too far behind if it should actually become something that's going to be of direct relevance to us.
What do you think the internet is really missing to become more of a useful tool to someone with less time to just play around and enjoy themselves, but actually have to get something done? What does it need?
Well, I mean, for someone to play around and enjoy themselves, that's quite a different question than from someone actually trying to be productive. If you're trying to play around and enjoy yourself, you've probably got time in your hands, and then it's not quite so crucial. What I found in our limited forays into the maze of information that's available is that typically the route between where you are and what you think you need to find and finding it is typically very, very long, very time-consuming, and in our experience to date, I suppose, more often than not, doesn't lead you to where you thought you were hoping to be.
Do you think the problem needs to be solved by technology, by, say, librarians, or by rules and regulations and policies? I mean, if you had to solve the problem, how would you try to solve the problem?
I suppose if I had to try and solve the problem of getting from where I want to be to from where I am to where I want to be is probably more a question of technology. It's probably a question of slightly more sophisticated search engines. The problem now, of course, is that a huge amount of data has been opened up to searching, to browsing, and of course, if you don't know exactly what you're looking for and exactly where it is, you're probably in for a fairly long, arduous task until you find what you're after. But I expect probably not so much a question of policy or whatnot, it's probably a question of technology before that can be simply made a little more accessible to the average Joe. Right now, things are still in a state of being built up to be, to the popular masses, and just recently the PTC Telecom themselves have stepped in and offered their service as a provider. It's just now really starting to take off. I don't know if that's because there is that true demand or if it's because a lot of people are playing Me Too. But the path between someone who would like to be on the internet and a provider and knowing how to get started is still a little bit long and rocky right now. I'm a sort of pseudo-technically savvy kind of guy, but even for me to try to find a provider to try and get through the technical details, it's still a bit difficult. And so I think that as telecom comes and tries to make it available to the masses, it will probably become a bit easier, but right now it's a bit tough. I was asked recently by an industry luminary if I did or did not think that the internet was the single most dominating factor, or the single most important aspect in this industry, and would be for the coming time. I believe that's true. But I think that right now the hype and the speed at which has been forced down everyone's throat doesn't yet quite live up to the majority of the people's expectations and requirements. I suppose the one tragedy scenario that you could write for 10 years from now, in fact probably for 4.5 years from now, would be the case where the internet simply collapsed under its own bulk. I have the feeling, though, that it's reaching a commercial level right now that the technology companies are probably going to find a way to save it from actually doing that, as the government agencies remove funding, as the thing becomes much more global. That would be one. I don't think that this tragedy is going to take place. I think the technology companies are going to step up to bat and save it from itself. In 10 years, I think that the problems that we have today in using the internet as a normal old person will probably have been dealt away with, and that there'll be very useful ways to navigate through the mass of data. And if it's a factor 10 now, it'll be a factor 100 then, to make it more useful to the average user.
Do you think you'll have it on your wrist?
Do I think I'll have the internet on my wrist? I don't think I'll have it on my wrist. I think the technology will be made available. I'm not sure how many people would think it a good idea to take advantage of it, frankly.
Well, Rich, that's a little bit different perspective than some of the things that we generally talk about. Dave is a busy guy, and his time is very valuable, and he wants the internet to give him something back for the time he spends on it. And I think he just finds that today's internet doesn't give him the things he needs in a time frame that makes it useful to him.
Well, I appreciate his perspective, and I think there's a lot of validity to it. On the other hand, he sort of reminds me of the person who as a freshman, walks into MSU's major research library and says, wow, this library with 5 million volumes is a lot bigger than the one that I had in high school. I can't find anything here anymore. This must not be a very useful library. Well, with the right catalog tool, you can find what you're looking for. And he's absolutely right. I mean, if he does a naive net search on Sabrina Airways, he's going to have trouble finding it. But if he goes to Yahoo and says Sabrina, he'll find it very quickly.
Well, difference of opinion, I guess.
Yep.
In tonight's Tech Talk, I want to talk some about the Internet Engineering Task Force, or IETF. This is the standards organization that makes the standards for the Internet. First off, let's visit the IETF's website. As you might expect, they have a website, and the URL is www.ietf.org. And one thing that you notice quickly when you take a look at the IETF website is it's not real high-tech, not a lot of animations. This is an organization that's all about business. They announce the next meetings, how to get to them, the TOW of the IETF, what to do when you get there, and they keep most of their information on an FTP server. I recently wrote a column in IEEE Computer about the IETF, and I titled the column, A High-Tech Approach to Making Standards. One thing that the IETF does is they make as much use of the internet as they possibly can in developing standards. For example, most of their discussions are electronic mail, so they have these terrible fights back and forth, technical discussions I guess would be a more appropriate way to say, technical discussions that go back and forth in email, to the point where they at times say that their face-to-face meetings that they have 3 times a year are just to sort of continue on with what they do in email, but the real work is done with email. This has the advantage that people all around the planet, the particular engineers that have the most to gain or lose by a good standard, actually can participate regardless of whether they're way up in management and have a travel budget or not. So people who never attend meetings have dramatic impact through email. They also use FTP to have the proceedings of their email and various other things, and the site for that is ftp.ietf.org. And it's not a very high-tech site, but sooner or later you can find pretty much everything the IETF has ever done. The other thing that they do that's very neat is they use the M-bone, or the multicast backbone, to actually show each meeting so people can watch the meetings. And there's roughly people in 22 countries at 500 different sites that watch a particular meeting. And I'm sure it's kind of neat. I'm sure you go to a site and you go to a conference room and there's a little television and you can sort of go in and watch the proceedings. And you can send email in. So that's really an exciting use of technology. They have roughly about 500 people that go to each meeting, and unlike a lot of standards organizations, the IETF is going up in its attendance. The next meeting is April 7th through the 11th in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to talk a little bit now about the process that the IETF goes through to develop and then approve their standard. The first thing that you have to do in pretty much any standards organization is create a working group, which is a group of people who sort of have a common interest. We'll create a working group for multimedia multicast or something. And so you start a working group, and then you start working on a document. So let me jump here to a little bit about the process. The IETF process is got 4 basic steps. In the first basic step, the working group is formed, and they begin producing a document. This document is called an internet draft. Now at this point it's not been approved by anybody. The only thing it means is somebody wrote it down. Now the way the internet drafts are distributed are through the FTP at the ftp.ietf.org site. One thing that vendors have actually been taking a little bit of advantage of the IETF is they'll create a document, they'll put it up, they'll create a working group of 2 people, and they'll say our document is an internet draft document, as if that meant something. And the answer is no, it just means somebody wrote it down. And so the IETF is a little bit nervous about people sort of overusing sort of this IETF logo, saying this is an internet draft of the IETF, which means nothing other than you can get it anonymous FTP. The whole purpose of an internet draft is for the working group to exchange comments and then send email back and forth, say this is a good idea, this is not a good idea. The formal standards process is triggered once the working group has developed a reasonably good internet draft. At that point, they send it to the executive committee of the IETF and say, please make this into a proposed standard. And at that point, the executive committee of the IETF takes some votes. They ask questions like, does this look like it has any chance of being a commercially successful product? Is there maybe a prototype implementation of this thing sitting around? How big is the working group? How dedicated is the working group? Are these a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing and they're just making something up? Or are these really the true engineers and the true players? So the neat thing about the process, it really focuses on, is this really going to be a real standard? So if the executive committee of the IETF says, yep, there you go, you're a proposed standard. At that point, they assign a number called the RFC, or the Request for Comments numbers. And from that point on, that is used as a tracking number to track the progress of this document. So things shouldn't be really taken very serious unless at least there's an RFC. You start from draft standard to, so the first step is to become proposed standard. And there are roughly 2,000 documents since the IETF began that have made it to proposed standards or been given RFC numbers. The next step is to what's called a draft standard. And to go from a proposed standard to a draft standard, you must have at least 2 independent implementations. So the interesting thing is there's no voting as much as there is if 2 companies have independently decided that this is a good specification and they're going to connect, and that is what's required to go to this proposed standard. Now at this point, it's sort of, this is roughly commercially viable as a proposed standard. And the final process, and only 60 documents have made it to what are called the Internet standard. And that's sort of the highest level of approval that the IETF gives to a standard, and that is to be called an Internet standard. And the way that's done is you need at least 3 independent, interoperable implementations of a proposed specification to make it to this level in the IETF. So basically, sort of in summary, this very short presentation of the IETF, the neat thing about the IETF is their focus on implementation. They don't just write a fake standard that's a piece of paper in it, or a book of any kind, but instead you must prove that this is truly a commercially viable product, and you have interoperable versions so that your standard is sufficient to have multiple vendors to be able to interoperate. And that's sort of unique in the standards community, to depend on implementation as the way to approve a standard.
Very interesting, Chuck. I spent some time at an IETF meeting back in March of 1993, the only one I've ever attended. And at that meeting, Tim Berners-Lee, the guy that had invented the World Wide Web, showed me this thing called NCSA Mosaic. And I I figure I can't top that, or maybe I should go back to an IETF meeting and find out what's being cooked up. The funny thing about that, of course, is the web wasn't particularly on the radar screen, and they had a very small birds of a feather session to talk about the World Wide Web, and maybe 12 people attended that particular session. The other thing I want to comment on, you mentioned that they multicast IETF meetings on the MBON.
Right.
And I saw how they do that, and it is actually very effective. Earlier you heard me poo-poo the idea of chat in real time as a way of collaborating. What they do with the MBON is they have 2 cameras in every session. They have one camera pointed at the speaker. They have the other camera pointed at the screen where the overhead slides are going. And if you think about it, a screen doesn't change very much, and a speaker moves around a lot, but so what? So if you lose some frames and lose some gestures, who cares? And you don't have to send a lot of change information out, which the MBON is very efficient in its multicast. It only sends data for the video if the video has changed. And so with very little bandwidth, you can capture a session live, and because the MBON is efficient in its multicasting, get it around to 26 countries or whatever to all those people.
22.
And I can imagine that it is almost as good for those folks as going to the meeting.
Right, and in some sense, one of the neat things about that is that they just sort of plan it in from the beginning. They tell you how to prepare your slides so that it works on the MBON. I mean, again, these are technical people, and so they're going to use it probably as well as the medium can be used.
And they've been doing it since 1993,
Right.
and you know, a lot of the
figured
stuff
a lot of stuff out.
a lot of stuff we'll be taking for granted in 2, 3, 5 years. They've been doing already.
Exactly. In this internet interview / travelogue segment, I continue my trek across Europe and interview Nick Stoughton of PERT Systems. And I asked Nick roughly how the internet is different in the United Kingdom than it is here in the United States of America.
I have a small ISP that's based fairly locally that I helped set up. My company has helped a number of ISPs getting off the ground, and this particular one was one of my first ever clients a year or so ago when I set up. And they offer a standard low-cost PPP dial-in account for home use, free web space, and a number of other services like FTP sites and so on.
How much does it cost per month?
It costs for this particular provider at the moment it's around £8 or £9 per month, and it's about to drop substantially. They've just done a big deal with one of the major telecom backbone providers to allow them to reduce their costs to about £5 a month.
So £5, how much is that in US dollars?
$7.50.
$7.50 a month. So are there different modems in Europe, or is it the same modems?
It's the same modems. The basic modem available on the market now are 2088.
But if you bought a US modem, you could bring it over here.
All US modems will work fine without any problems whatsoever. UK, the telcos are all private companies. British Telecom is by far the largest of which, and it was formerly a government subsidized industry. It is now an entirely independent company which has about 80% of the market. There is another company, Mercury, which has about the 19% of the remainder, and there's a major move afoot at the moment for small cable companies wiring up frantically each town at a time and are offering telephone services as well as cable television. Those telephone services are in turn used, in many cases, for internet access.
Has the British Telecom, have they done anything in the internet area?
Yes, they've set themselves up now as a major home provider. They started off as being purely a backbone provider and provided services to small ISPs. Recently they realized just how big the home market was and how much additional money they could make out of it, and so they've started to get into it themselves, as has Mercury, the other major provider.
Do you expect they'll be successful?
I think they'll be very successful. A lot of people trust them because they are the big telco. In the same way that many Americans would trust a major division of AT&T or whatever to be able to know what they're doing in this area, even if they may be substantially more expensive or whatever. Because they are big, they must be good. Well, the internet started in the UK with the ARPANET coming in to University College London, one of the first ever ARPANET sites, and certainly the first ARPANET site outside of the US was in London. However, it was a single site. The universities around England set up their own private network, the Joint Academic Network, or JANET, which was an X25-based network based on leased line copper cables running at about 64K best using pure X25 and for the vast majority of cases proprietary protocols. JANET was revamped substantially in about 1991 or 2 to replace the slow-speed copper networks based on X25 with fibre networks using pure IP protocols. There is now effectively a T3 style connection between all the universities in the country, which is gatewayed onto the internet reel in a number of key places. The number of people in the United Kingdom who have not heard about the internet are so small that you would not be able to measure it. The term has become so omnipresent and so universally understood that it's being used in many places in advertisements and so on in almost inappropriate fashions. There are adverts for the internet-ready power supplies. Yes, you can plug your computer into this power supply, and you may use your computer to attach the internet. There's nothing about the power supply itself that is internet-ready. There's even a cosmetic called online, because the society these days is an online wired society. There is absolutely nothing actually about the makeup that is anything to do with the internet, but they use the term very strongly in their advertising.
Do you think that the internet in some way is going to hasten the sort of global perspective of society and change, get people to thinking that everybody's the same and countries are going to mean less?
The internet is certainly challenging our perception of what national boundaries really mean. There are enormous questions to do with national rights and so on, and laws associated with data crossing boundaries. For example, it is illegal in France to use encryption of any sort. You can send an encrypted email to somebody else in the United Kingdom, but if you send it to somebody in France, they are breaking the law if they read it, and they are certainly breaking the law if they send you an encrypted reply.
Well, the pictures that you were seeing as the travelogue part, of course, were Brussels, Belgium. That's the downtown area of Brussels, Belgium. As a matter of fact, that one of the shots was exactly where I bought this suit, was in one of those shots.
And that'll be a moment you'll remember.
Exactly. One of the things that I thought was neat that Nick reminded me of is that University of London was one of the 11th site on the original ARPANET, and they were sort of the first faraway site to test sort of how you communicate with over long distances.
Well, that's sure useful for us to remember that the internet is in fact a global thing, and it has been for a long time. Of course, the UK was a little different for a while because they ran their addresses the other way. So .uk is now at the end. It was at the beginning, and some people thought that was very apropos because in the real world they drive on the other side of the highway. So.
Oh, very good.
Let's see what's going on in the news of the net. IBM has announced they're going to spend 20% of their research budget on the internet next year. That accounts for $1 billion out of a total of a $5 billion research budget. The projects include their Integrion home banking network, their new low-cost network computer they're working on, and converting the Lotus Notes product into a form of internet groupware. The Baby Bells have gotten together and have chosen Netscape as their browser. 5 regional Bell companies have picked Netscape as the browser. Under a joint marketing arrangement, they will distribute the software to their customers, and the combined customer base accounts for 72 million people. The companies involved are Ameritech, Bell Atlantic, Bell South, Pacific Bell, and Southwestern Bell. An international copyright treaty is being considered. A UN agency has convened a meeting in Geneva with a proposal to extend copyright rules to meet the needs of online networks. One of the provisions would provide protection for databases that are not currently copyrightable under the law as it stands today. Now, the U.S. government seems to be generally in favor of these copyright provisions, but in the U.S., the library and internet communities have expressed a great deal of worry. Music television, MTV, has formed a new way to make money. They're extracting payments for access to their website. They've set fees for internet service providers, and these fees could reach millions of dollars. And the deal is, if an ISP doesn't pay the fee, then MTV may block access from that ISP to the MTV website. Some people are wondering if this is a form of inverse advertising. Others are saying maybe this is a form of extortion. CompuServe has killed its WOW service. In early 1996, they announced this new service that was geared towards families and those that wanted simple access to the internet. CompuServe has invested some $25 million in this service, but now, due to lack of subscriber interest, they've killed it. America Online has acquired Excite as their search engine. In a $15 million stock deal, they got hold of this software. This is now going to be the exclusive search engine for AOL. What's interesting is this replaces the web crawler engine that was bought only a year or so ago by AOL for $1 million. AOL's flat rate pricing has caused some busy signals, perhaps not surprisingly. In the first day that flat rate pricing was available, 8 million customers tried to sign on to the service. This is interesting because AOL only has 7 million customers, meaning there were a lot of repeat visitors. A spokesman for AOL says, "We're going into territory that no one has gone into before." And that's tonight's News in the Net.
That going into territory where no one's gone before, that rings a bell to me.
I didn't know William Shatner had found a job at AOL.
Oh, exactly. The thing that impressed me most about the story that you did impressed me the most was IBM and Lotus Notes, your very first story. The thing that struck me is it's sort of like when big companies like IBM jump into something with both feet. There's something that you got to hear. I go back to Unix. Unix used to be sort of this weird thing, and all of a sudden IBM, HP, and DEC jumped into Unix and made a great big difference. And now with the Lotus Notes, I mean, you might think you call those, count those guys out, but that I think is potentially a very powerful force.
A year ago, I heard the president of the Lotus division give a very compelling talk about, one of his quotes was, and he said, in about a year from now, when anyone says our software is enabled for the web, that will be a meaningless statement because all software will be enabled for the web. And they've had to go beyond, Lotus Notes isn't just going to be enabled for the web, it's going to be web.
Right.
Okay, it's time to do a little bit of net surfing, and first we have to go visit an online resume. Now, in all my travels, I've never met anyone like this person. This person makes Chuck look like a dull guy, and that's very impressive. I'm hanging out in the press area at Internet World. This guy comes up to me and he shows me a press pack for the new Frank and Ernest site on the World Wide Web. And we get to talking, and 4 hours later we're still talking and going to exhibits, and he knows all the new technologies to check out and all the people to meet, and he's just one hyperactive web dude. So first off, I want to show folks Ken Spector's web page. This is his resume page. He has other pages that are more exciting, but look here, he's got a very appropriate use of a QuickTime. It's his resume, and he just says hi. He's just waving at you and says
That's a
hi.
QuickTime? That's an inline QuickTime?
I'm sorry, an
That's
inline,
animated GIF.
Animated
Okay,
GIF,
right.
yes. He's got other stuff that's, fancy QuickTime VR and
Okay.
everything. But for a resume, you want it to be low-key, right?
Beverly Hills.
And he has a spoken objective. We don't have audio set up here, so we won't listen to that, but you could listen to Ken's objective as spoken by him. And then from there on, it looks pretty much like a conventional resume.
Madison, good place.
Education, experience.
UW-Madison.
But it's got hyperlinks. And in my opinion, this is just the way you ought to do an online resume. Nice little description of what you're up to. And some of the things he does. He's involved with Hollywood Online. This is a very popular site that's pointed to by Microsoft Internet Explorer. And you know how we do on-the-road segments, interviewing internet luminaries. He's in Hollywood. He interviews Hollywood luminaries, and look at all these folks that he's interviewed. Samuel Jackson, Gina Davis, and so forth. He also does some radio and a whole bunch of other things.
What was his degree in?
Really interesting guy.
Is he a technical guy or is he comm arts kind of guy?
I believe...
Business administration, okay.
But
We're still the
he's got
we're
some
still the
radio-
number one nerds on the net.
There we go.
I mean,
There we go.
We are still
Well,
top nerds.
One of the things he was trying to tell me we ought to take a look at, and we are breaking the story on Internet TCI. This is embargoed news, but this show will be shown after it's okay to talk about it. This is the Frank and Ernest website, and let me tell you what's going to happen there. The comic strip is going to have a 3D version on the web, and this will be a QuickTime VR universe. Some of the same plot lines that you see in the print comic strip will be replicated and extended, and you can navigate this 3D world and interact with the characters. So this is going far beyond what Dilbert has done,
right?
And sort of moving into fancy animations and even 3D worlds that you can navigate. So in early January, take a look for the Frank and Ernest site on the World Wide Web, and it's www.frankandernest, not ampersand, frankandernest.com.
Well, the Frank and Ernest guy was one of the earliest ones to put an email in every single strip, and so that's not surprising.
He's
that they're
pretty hip.
pushing the envelope a little bit.
He's pretty hip. Well, while you're at it, you'll probably want to go off to Hollywood Online and look at some of the other work that Ken has done, and there you'll find, for instance, he interviewed this person. You happen to know who this is?
No, I don't.
She's one of the stars of Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Oh, okay.
And she's dressed completely differently on the show. She looks a lot better here than she does when she's in full makeup.
Was her hair all shaved off? Or wrong Star Trek movie?
She's sort of a half Worf look.
Okay,
Looks
that'd
a little,
be different.
Looks a little like a Klingon.
That'd be different. Switchboard. We've been at Switchboard
We've been
before.
at Switchboard many times, but there's a new feature of Switchboard that everybody needs to check out.
Okay.
It used to be, I know what business I'm looking for. I need to tell it how to, I want to find Frank's florist or something. Now look what they've done. They've got categories. Boy, do they have categories. Just about any category you can imagine. You click on a category, you give it a city name, and it will give you a list of all the businesses that fit into that particular category.
Do you think people had to pay to get listed here?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
So this is definitely worth checking out, and next time we'll have more time to take a look at it.
Okay.
So that's all the time we have today, and we'll see you on the net.